Now that 2017 is wrapping up, I wanted to take the time and discuss the voted best game of the year, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Now, let me prerequisite this video with this. I love this game and what it did for Nintendo in 2017. I believe the game will be regarded by many as one of the best of all time, and for some good reasons. The grand sense of adventure as you traverse the fields, mountains, and rivers of Hyrule is truly something special. The developers took their time to ensure the player felt like he or she was actually the one discovering Hyrule's many secrets, which is a crazy feat considering this game is littered with them at every turn. A good example of this would be, while navigating a field with tall trees, one seemed to have a thicker base and maybe just a few feet on its surrounding trees. So climbing that tree to see if indeed there was something special about its slight uniqueness, I found a single stone at its summit. Link picked up that stone and found one of the game's 800 Korok seeds. The game is literally filled with over 1,000 moments of discovery like that. That's something no other game has ever done and is absolutely incredible when you think about it. The game's introduction of gear Link can wear also needs to be mentioned. Breath of the Wild marks the first time the player can customize Link's appearance in the franchise. This too lends to the game's mastery of the sense of discovery, as you can only purchase a handful of these outfits from the few towns tucked away in Hyrule, meaning that you'll have to find about 80% of them. These outfits are broken up into 3 simple categories: headwear, chest, and legs. By equipping several complete outfits, Link can be rewarded with some kind of stat bonus. For example, having trouble climbing mountains? Try equipping 3 pieces of climbing gear and Link will be rewarded with the climbing speed up stat, making him climb twice as fast. Take it a step further and upgrade each piece to the set to level 2 and stack on another bonus of climbing jump stamina up, allowing the player to climb even more proficiently. The player is able to mix and match these 3 pieces from various outfit sets to get Blondie pretty much looking however they please. The customization of Link's appearance is furthered even greater, as pieces and outfits can be dyed a variety of different colors. Lastly, I wanted to mention that the game does not hold the player's hand, at all. Unlike a great many Zelda games to have come before it, Breath of the Wild is completely unlocked basically right out of the gate. There is an introductory area to help teach Link the core mechanics of the 120 plus hour adventure to come, but outside of this starting area, which too can be tackled however the player sees fit, the game does not explain anything or promote any sort of itinerary at all, meaning that if Link feels the urge to save Hyrule from Ganon right away, and save the sightseeing for later maybe, the player is more than welcome to try and do so. That of course would deprive the player of the game's best attribute, discovery, but that's entirely up to them, which is really cool. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild rocketed Nintendo back into relevance upon its release back in March, and subsequently earned the Game of the Year title by many major reviewing websites. Personally, I really enjoyed the near 200 hours I've spent exploring Breath of the Wild's version of Hyrule. It is the very definition of a system seller and a game that earns the reception it received. With that all being said, I did want to discuss some of the problems I feel the game had that were overlooked due to the game's importance to Nintendo. These issues are by no means game-breaking, but having spent nearly 200 hours playing Breath of the Wild, I feel credible enough in addressing. 1. Dungeons. There are 0 dungeons in this game. While the developers took painstaking lengths to ensure the map as a whole was filled with puzzles and exploration, it, for me at least, was not a suitable replacement for a core staple of the franchise, dungeons. There is something inherently Zelda about completing its dungeons in their games. The sense of accomplishment upon completing the dungeons in all prior game entries is just completely missing from this game. I understand the world is like one big dungeon, and in some ways the game's enemy-free Divine Beast segments kind of look like they would be Breath of the Wild's version of prior games' dungeons, but let's be honest here, the game simply doesn't have any dungeons. Two, soundtrack. So I've been humming the Ocarina of Time soundtrack since 1998. Link to the Past, Majora's Mask, The Minish Cap, Wind Waker, all these games have had some of the most transportive music in the entire video game industry. While Breath of the Wild's piano debut is not bad by any means, it's just simply not memorable. The game has 2 or 3 spectacular tracks, and the rest just kind of felt like filler. Breath of the Wild marks the first time in the series I did not feel the urge to purchase the game's soundtrack or even give some of the tracks a good listening to on YouTube. It's not bad, but for me it's extremely disappointing. 3. This game is a completionist's nightmare. Why do this to me, Breath of the Wild? I cannot have both maxed out hearts and stamina once I've completed every shrine, every divine beast, and both DLCs. Even worse, you're gonna leave me hanging just by a few. The game's content has met closure with the game's second DLC, and players are not able to fulfill their lifetime process of getting 2 rows of hearts before going to face Ganon without having to sacrifice your stamina wheel, making that not complete as well. This is inexcusable and somewhat lazy, given the game's opportunity to remedy it with its 2 DLCs. Damn you. 4. Story. This was a big one for me. The real story took place 100 years before Breath of the Wild. So instead of experiencing it, like for yourself, you're instead awkwardly tasked to find 13 memories of the events long ago. So in short, the game's story is told through 13 scrambled 1 to 2 minute clips of Link's past through the course of a 120-hour game. This removes a huge chunk of urgency from the events currently taking place in the game, and instead made it feel like the player is just going through the motions to defeat Ganon, well, because he's the bad guy. The storytelling was a massive misstep for Breath of the Wild, and easily the worst in the series, as the actual timeline of the game doesn't even really have a story. And lastly, 5. Ganon. This, for me, is hands down my number 1 issue with Breath of the Wild. The final showdown at Hyrule Castle is so lackluster, it's a crime. The game's built to this moment for up to 200 hours, and what happens? You get some kind of cutscene perhaps to showcase the big baddie's evil motivations. No such luck. Ganon is a motiveless creature who's completely void of any personality whatsoever. Link travels the lands of Hyrule for potentially hundreds of hours to reach the game's climax, to just have it literally fall from the ceiling without any sort of exposition. It's awful. And he fights him just like it's like a territorial feud. It's very, very terribly done. Prior renditions of Ganon's character each had their motivations, and the game's built upon his twisted personality through the narrative, ultimately catering to the player wanting to strike him down with the Master Sword at the end game, whereas Breath of the Wild's Ganon felt like some wild animal who just chose to post up at Hyrule Castle because he liked it, and yeah. The rest of the game leading up to the final showdown was so expertly crafted that many reviewers didn't even mention this lackluster climax. However, for me and thousands of other fans of the franchise, it was a totally deflated climax that ended an otherwise masterful game on a weak note. So those are the 5 big issues that I had with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Make no mistake, I love this game so much. Despite these issues, Breath of the Wild still manages to just ooze creativity with nearly every minute it's being played. It's introduced a freshness and freedom to the franchise that there's really no going back from. The game, for me, however, is just not as perfect as some of these reviews have claimed it to be, and I do see a lot of room for growth moving the franchise forward. What did you think of Breath of the Wild? Did you have the same issues I had with the game? Did you have different ones? Did you love it? Let me know down below, and don't forget to click that subscribe button.